Right, well, here we are. It's Sunday, September 9th, 2018. I'm Matt Lynett, and welcome to our weekend edition of Calling Sacred Cows. Today is going to be a special stream in that I had promised I had made a promise to someone on Quora that I would make this stream specifically about conscientiousness. That I would make this stream about a virtue that I found really tends to help people get ahead in life. You can have all sorts of talent, and you will be beaten by somebody that works hard, generally. You can have everything all put together, and if ultimately, or you can have all the different pieces, but if you don't take the initiative to put them together yourself, you can't count on anybody else to put things together for you. And so, we're going to be talking about exactly what it takes to put the pieces of life together. And I got to thinking, when I made this promise, what would be the best way of clearly and concisely putting it all together for you viewers? What have I found to be helpful? Then, as I was thinking about this whole situation, I just started thinking, well, what about my childhood? I could talk about my mom. I could talk about the different things that she taught me. I could talk about not giving up. Things like the only way you fail is by not trying, or the only way that the only time that you fail is when you stop trying. So you can go and decide through persistence to go and follow something through to the end. You can go and decide you don't have to throw in the towel, for instance. So that would be one virtue. That would be that of consistency. That would be one of persistence. That would be one of stubbornness. That would be one of fortitude. But then there's you need to find some way of binding them all together. So it's not enough to not be a quitter, but you also need to be doing the right things. For example, it's conscientiousness pretty well encompasses this idea, because it just means you're reflecting on what it is you're saying or doing before you say or do it. And then you're going through with whatever it is. I find lots of intuitive people tend to find this kind of a thing kind of difficult. A lot of people who are very bright wind up not being conscientious and not making as much out of their lives as they could, because they go and they rely on only their smarts to get them through something, or sometimes they get to the point of looking at a situation and then realizing, hey, the situation is such that I can't, or I know that I could do this, and knowing that I could do this is enough for me. And so I'm not going to go through and do what I know I should do, even though I know I should do it. So you wind up having people that are so good at imagining the results of their actions and visualizing things and envisioning their goals and all these different things, that winds up being satisfaction enough for them, as opposed to actually achieving what they set out to do. Please excuse me, I wound up having an issue with, there we are, my light. So that's about where we stand with this particular topic. And so I remembered reading autobiographies and biographies of Ben Franklin. He was one of my favorite historical figures, because he was your definition of a self-made man. He started as a newspaper boy, an apprentice in a newspaper shop, and wound up becoming one of the most wealthy and influential people of his time, and certainly one of the most influential people of all history. So, the principles that he puts forth are timeless. And you can read there's a book that he has written on how to get wealthy. It's timeless knowledge. But I think that going and focusing on things that we can make ourselves into, things that are in and of themselves good, would be the best use of our time here. And so we're going to systematically go through the 13 virtues of Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin said something along the lines of, actually I'll see if I can find his exact quote. I propose to myself, for the sake of clearness, to use rather more names with fewer ideas annexed to each than a few names with more ideas. And I included under 13 names of virtues all that at that time occurred to me as necessary or desirable, and annexed to each a short precept which fully expressed the extent I gave to its meaning. So we can just go straight through the list and have that be it, or we can go and unpackage it. And since we're turning this into a stream, I figured on just unpackaging it and going forward with it, with what it is that we're doing. Okay, so we'll begin with virtue number 1, temperance. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. So this already is something that you don't see touted as a virtue very much in modern Western civilization. We are hyper-hedonistic. It's one thing to be hedonistic and to go for what you want. And it's another thing to, quote, let your belly be your god. It's another thing to be gluttonous. It's another thing to pursue certain fleshly desires, for instance, that of food and drink, beyond that which is healthy. There's even this basic idea that you eat until you are full. You eat until you're stuffed. Well, there's some interesting things about that. If you're eating carbs, if you're eating especially simple carbs, I'm not going to talk about vegetables because that's a different deal entirely, but if you're eating, and I know potatoes is a root, but whatever. If you're eating potatoes, if you're eating sugars, if you're eating starches, if you're eating these higher glycemic foods, you will be able to eat more of them. Your body will actually tolerate more of them than your body would tolerate of some more fibrous food or more protein-laden food. You'll go and you'll eat and you'll eat and you'll eat and you'll finally get the full signal, but you'll be stuffed. And you're going to have a gigantic amount of insulin coursing through your body. You're going to be making yourself unhealthy. You are going to be making yourself quite literally sluggish. The feeling where you might get a little tired after a meal, that is due to having too much insulin in your system and it tanking your blood sugar, in addition to having your energy and blood flow directed to your guts, causing peristalsis and all the rest of that. So being temperate would cause you to not eat so much that immediately you have the gastric emptying, immediately you have the insulin, immediately you have all of this insane peristalsis, but that you just eat enough. You eat until you are nourished, not until you are stuffed. And the same would then go for drinking, and I suppose this is specifically about alcoholic beverages. Drink not to elevation, so don't get smashed. So, according to Ben Franklin's maxim, it's okay to imbibe of alcoholic beverages. Now, I would go and say be very, very careful, especially if you have a history of alcoholism in your family. But definitely know your limits in food and in drink, and don't exceed them. Now, that's not particularly popular in this society because I want what I want and I want it now. I want my candy, I want my cake, I want my pie, I want my soup, and I want to have a six-pack abs. And it doesn't work that way. I want a good, high-quality life with lots of energy, and I want to be stuffing my face full of chips. No, it doesn't work that way. I want to live a long, healthy, happy life and drink sugary pop every day. No. That's not how temperance works. I mean, certainly you might be able to have a small little bit of something sugary. A few grams here, a few grams there, that would be fine. But if you make a habit of it, and if you overindulge, you're not going to be healthy. And so this is, like your grandma's advice, eat your vegetables. Because if you're eating fibrous foods, you're eating proteinous foods, you're eating these kinds of things that are boring, these things that don't give you a gigantic dopamine rush because they don't metabolize straight into sugar and give you a huge sugar shot, you will be more full with less. You'll be more full eating 100% rye bread than you would eating wheat bread. You'll be more full eating vegetables, raw vegetables, especially if you can, than you would eating, a porridge or a candy or potatoes or beets or things that are high glycemic. You're going to, by eating healthy fats, be able to refrain from overeating. Indeed, a study was conducted amongst prisoners, and I'm not sure of the exact details, but I believe it went something like this, that they tried to overfeed prisoners. And for the people that ate the breads and the potatoes and the pastas and all these different things, you were able to feed them multiple times their daily allotment, or what they actually needed, and they would go and turn into big fat balls. Whereas if you were feeding them healthy fats, if you were feeding them vegetables, they actually wouldn't be able to overeat because their hormonal regulation of hunger wasn't messed up, and they wound up being way more healthy just due to the nature of what they ate, because the quantity wound up taking care of itself. So this virtue of temperance is incredibly important if you care about your health. And seemingly, Ben Franklin valued health, wealth, and wisdom. He went and made sayings like early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And so health is clearly a very important thing, and temperance helps with that. And in addition, it helps with cultivating appropriate mental attitudes. What do you do with your free time? Do you have enough free time to be able to relax, or do you have more? Excuse me. Do you have enough free time to be able to relax, or do you? There we are. Or do you go and have too much free time to the point where you're being wasteful and careless and thoughtless and a bad steward of the time that you have in your life? That's an important question to ask yourself. And the way Ben Franklin went through these 13 virtues was every single week he would work on one, which would let you go through the list 4 times in a year. And of course, you would look at all of the virtues. You would look at every single one of them and do a self-assessment at the end of the day of how virtuous was I in this aspect? Do I get demerits? Do I get points? What can I improve? But then it would give concerted focus, more so than the others, more so than just reviewing the others. It would give concerted focus to one virtue per week. And so, you can start by deciding week 1, I am going to be temperate. I'm not going to eat too much. I'm not going to drink too much. I'm going to be moderate in the things that I do. If you play video games, I'm not going to play too many video games. If you exercise, I'm not going to over-exercise and hurt myself. Whatever it is that you do, be wise about it and exercise temperance. Now we can go to virtue number 2, silence. Speak not, but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Speak not, but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Now, this is very important in that if you have trifling conversation, if you are known as someone who wastes words, if you're a gossip, if you have inane conversations with no point, people won't value your words as much as if you focus, or as they would if you were to focus on making your words worthy of being listened to. Of course, you can engage in small talk if you need to, but gossiping, slandering, putting bad constructions on things that other people are saying, misrepresenting other people, lying. I mean, of course, there might be a situation where lying would be appropriate. Do you have Jews in your basement? When asked by the SS, the answer to that is no, I don't. But be careful with what you say, and make sure that what does come out of your mouth winds up being uplifting and encouraging, and will build other people up. This is also important for your reputation in other ways, because if you refuse to play in the mud, if you refuse to play the stupid games that everybody else plays with words, people will respect you as a person more. Not only will they take more seriously what you say, but they will respect you as a person. Their idea of your character, their idea of your ethos will go up. And that will ultimately not only be beneficial for everybody else around you because you're building them up, but it will be beneficial for you because you are generating for yourself a good reputation. I mean, how many people actually want to go and talk with a gossip? Like, if you really think about it, do you want to go talk with a gossip? Do you want to give any kind of information? No. Because you know that if you're there talking with a gossip, what's likely to happen is that gossip will then turn on you as soon as you're gone. So anybody with a modicum of wisdom, anyone who actually knows what's going on, knows that that sort of a thing is abominable. You just don't do it. You just don't mess with gossips. You just let them be by themselves and, share their words amongst themselves and waste everybody's time and energy and effort and besmirch people's reputations. Little do they realize that the reputation they're besmirching the most is their own. Now, it's not only gossiping. It's idle words. Have you ever been around in a meeting where all people ever do is waste their employer's time? Or a lab meeting where all you do is waste the researcher's time? Or any kind of a meeting where all you're doing is chewing the cud and not having any real purpose for the conversation when you're actually supposed to be going and accomplishing something? The project update meetings that are just there to make people feel good as opposed to actually accomplish something, all of these different things are bad. all of these different things are very, very bad, because you're ultimately detracting from the real purpose, or the supposed purpose of why you're there. So make sure that your words are apt. Make sure that your words are apt. And if they're not apt, then keep your mouth shut. That's the basis, or the basics of the second virtue, which is silence. The third of Ben Franklin's virtues is order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. And this is one that, especially when dealing with people that might have ADHD, or people that are very artistic or very creative, might have a lot of trouble with this one. I know this is one I need to force upon myself. This isn't something that comes naturally to me. Order, though, is immensely important when it comes to accomplishing your responsibilities. And I would suggest that if you don't have any responsibilities in the first place, the first thing to do would be to get some ones that are worth having. Get some ones that are worth having. And then when you go about doing what you set out to accomplish, when you go about living your life, live your life in an orderly fashion. You know, if there's a place for things, you put it back. If there's a place for your clothes, you hang them up. If there's a place for your shoes, you put them away. If there's, if you need to go and beat the welcome mat at your door because too many people have rubbed their feet on it, then beat the welcome mat at your door, etc. Let all your things have their places, and let each part of your business have its time. Now, beating the welcome mat isn't exactly like that, but going and deciding and having a plan and following through with it, and having a place for everything makes it a lot easier to be creative. The limits actually go and give much more strength to your creativity. If you know right where everything is that you need when you need it, you can go and get it. And the few seconds that you spend putting things back after you're done with them pales in comparison to the benefit that you get for having everything in its designated place and being able to find it when you need it. Also, having a time for everything. If you have goals, if you have plans, and so on. If you have goals, if you have plans, all these different things that you might have. If you don't have a schedule, if you don't have at least somewhat of an itinerary, if you don't have some way of keeping track of what needs to happen, if you don't have a way of managing your workflow, you're going to be very ineffective with the time that you do have. It can be as simple as, today I will do X, tomorrow I will do Y, Tuesday I will do Z. And then you go about doing X, Y, and Z in time. One of the biggest things is in studying. Now, there are many people that can do very well when cramming, and there are many people that don't care because they feel like bad students. But all of the research shows that the biggest mental growth happens when you are sleeping. And so the best thing to do is to learn a bit and sleep, and learn a bit and sleep. And so over time, the students with the best habits, that of getting enough sleep and of studying enough on a consistent basis, will internalize the material way better than would students that cram. And the whole purpose, remember, you're setting out with an objective of learning something if you're in school. You don't just set out with the objective of getting a good score, because the whole point is improving of yourself. The point is improving yourself. Grades are merely an indicator, and it can be a flawed one at that. But if you go and you set about studying something, then consistency will be key. And then having a fashion that, okay, I know that when I come across this kind of material, I'm going to study it this way. And when I come across that kind of material, I'm going to study it that way. These ideas like learn one, do one, teach one, if you can integrate that into your learning, doing, and teaching, you will become very competent in what you set out to do. Whether or not competence is of much interest to you, competence is definitely an important thing. You can't minimize how important actually being good at what you do is. Certainly you wind up having people that have all the soft skills, being able to smooth talk their way into different roles, but ultimately you need to be able to back up what you say too. So you have to have the soft skills, you have to have the hard skills, and the best way of obtaining those as a student would be to have good study habits. And ultimately that means make the most of the time that you actually spend studying. Have a 3 or 4 hour time block and fit all your studying in that time block every day. And if you don't finish, well, that's fine. You have another 3 or 4 hour time block. And you're definitely going to be doing better if you focus on mastering what you're doing in those 3 to 4 hour time blocks than if you go and just try to go through as much as you can the night before an exam. Retention will be better, performance will be better, and anxiety will be a lot lower because you will have established yourself to yourself as someone who knows what you're talking about. And you can apply this methodology for studying to anything else that you set about doing and planning. You go and you make milestones that you hit along the way to your goals. Whether it be starting a business and establishing a certain amount of funding or a certain amount of sales, or whether it be getting a job and having performance goals and setting up with your boss these ideas that, okay, if I go and I exceed these particular performance goals, I can go and expect to get these sorts of raises and promotions on this kind of a time schedule. And then you just hold yourself to the highest standards and hold other people that you're working with to those same kinds of high standards. And it's amazing what you and others will be able to accomplish on account of being held to these standards and being kept to being held to task and being able to engage things in an orderly fashion. Oh, hello. Go clean your room, Jordan Peterson. Use a schedule, Jordan Peterson. For studying, having a daily routine helped. Indeed. Yes, good evening to both of you, or to all three of you who are watching now, and to anybody else who may be watching this after the fact. I know this is a weird time to be streaming. So far we've gone through the first 3 of 13 of Ben Franklin's list of virtues that he attempted to develop throughout the course of his life. Virtue number 4 is resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. I want to say that again. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. I'll say it finally one more time. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. So the first thing about resolving to perform what you ought, that's it's important. It's very important. If you know that you should or should not be doing something, then resolve either to do it or not to do it. If I know I should be preparing X or Y material for my stream, then I resolve to prepare X or Y material for my stream. Then you go to the previous one of order, and you make your resolutions very clear. You give them, criteria for being done right, a time by which they should be done, and you hold yourself to it. And the holding yourself to it is the second part. It's the second part. Perform without fail what you resolve. Resolution is a very, very, very difficult virtue to espouse, but it's important. It's incredibly important. And I figure it's no secret I'm going to tell you what I'm in the middle of doing in addition to all of my other work. I have set myself up to take the Chartered Financial Analyst Level 1 exams in December. I'm going to be going to Amsterdam and taking my Chartered Financial Analyst Level 1 exam on December 1st. Now, I decided ultimately on doing this on Friday. And so that means that I have my work cut out for me. I'm going to be studying, and have been ever since I got the materials, studying for 3 to 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. And sometimes more in terms of reviewing the material and so on, but going over new material for 3 to 4 hours a day. And that's in addition to all my other responsibilities, but I've just gone and set aside that time. And it's non-negotiable that I'm just going to do it. I have a schedule, I have how much I should be getting done, and my goal is, since I basically have now, 79 or 8 days until the exam, I'm going through everything with the intention of being done about 3 weeks early. And then, this is ridiculous. Okay, there we go, the light's back on. Being done 3 weeks early, and then spending the remaining 3 weeks working on practice tests and reviewing material that needs to be reviewed. I'm first just going for content mastery. And my benchmark for my content is being able to teach someone else. I don't care what the exam asks, because it's entirely possible to prepare for an exam and get a good score and still not have mastered the content. My goal is going to be able to have such an understanding of the material by the time I'm done with it, to be able to teach any reasonably intelligent 15-year-old all the material. By reasonably intelligent, I mean C and B student. If you cannot teach a B student the material, and it's not something incredibly esoteric, you do not know it well enough. If you cannot build things up from the basics, go back to first principles, and discuss why things are the way they are, you do not know it well enough. You have only memorized something. So I'm basically going through all the stuff that I've been teaching people for the past 10 years to do. I'm going back to studying for an exam with a 43% failure rate. Now, I don't intend to fail, but I'm not actually studying for the exam. I am studying for myself, because that knowledge is going to be useful for me and my goals. I would like to be able to involve myself more in finance. I would like to be able to involve myself more in computer modeling of financial situations. I would like to be able to set myself up to being able to provide more value for people in that particular way, and then being able to outsource some of what I'm doing right now. And the curriculum, the CFA curriculum, is quite thorough in that regard. So I'm submitting myself to that material. I'm committing myself to learning it. And I'm just not taking any excuses. I'm learning the stuff. I'm taking care of myself. I'm sticking to a schedule. And that's the end of it. And I'm putting in other safeguards in place to make sure that I don't fail. It's just the same as I would tell any high school or any college student, any graduate school student, any postdoc with research. Anyone who's in the process of learning something needs to be able to approach things in an orderly, methodical fashion and follow through with what he sets out to do. Well, hello, Mr. Garvey. Yeah, it's mostly stats, and then there's a lot of picking up a particular set of vocabulary, picking up a particular system of how you're supposed to conduct yourself. Indeed, the biggest, or I think it's either the biggest or second biggest section in the entire exam is ethics. Which is interesting because you wind up having all the finance people getting a bad reputation, but ultimately it's the case of a few bad apples spoiling the entire bunch. You can't engage in the kinds of behaviors that people do in finance without trust. And so you wind up having to have all the financial stuff in order. But if you don't have the ethical stuff in order, they're not going to let you pass. So you just learn it all. And just because they have a particular standard of ethics, which is actually a very good one to have, I'm not going to have any problems with it, doesn't mean that you can't hold yourself to even higher standards. It's pretty amazing in that sense. It doesn't mean you can't hold yourself to higher standards. So that was virtue number 4, resolution. Virtue number 5, frugality. Frugality. Make no expense but to do good to others or yourself, i.e. waste nothing. I'll say that one more time. Make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. So, the idea of waste is intimately connected with the idea of objectives, of goals, and of priorities, of values. The saying, show me a man's checkbook, and I'll show you what a man cares about, is very true. What you spend your money on reveals a lot about who you are as a person. If you are spending your money on booze, cigarettes, and hookers, well, that means that booze, cigarettes, and hookers is what you care about. It is what you value. It is what you hold in high esteem. Whether you think that you should or not is a different question, but that is ultimately an indicator of what your value system is. So, if you think about everything that you purchase, if you think about everything that you buy, are you buying things in order to cause something good to happen? Okay, you buy food to feed yourself, to feed your family, etc. You buy financial assets in order that whatever it is that you have bought might produce things for you or for others. You don't spend your money on stupid stuff you don't need or that isn't going to provide some good for yourself or for others. according to your definition of good, of course. And of course, you can wind up having the understanding that there was basically a system of Judeo-Christian values in that time. So you wouldn't be frivolous with your money. Now, that's not to say you can't go and have some really awesome experiences or spend a great deal of money on doing things. Track day with Ferraris, why not? That's an experience. But if you're going to be just, I don't know, filling up your attic with a whole bunch of crap you don't need, filling up your living room with a whole bunch of crap you don't need, filling up your house with a whole bunch of crap you don't need, well, then you're just being wasteful. If you're not deriving any value, and you won't be deriving anything of value out of what it is that you purchased, then don't purchase it. And that's what is meant by frugality. It doesn't mean being a tightwad. It just means being conscientious of what it is that you're spending, what your priorities are, and having your spending and your priorities being congruent one with another. And keeping track of your expenses is a great way of ensuring frugality. You don't even need to so much have principles, but just draw your attention to these things, and more often than not, they'll get sorted out. The next of our virtues is number 6, industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Lose no time, be always employed in something useful, and cut off all unnecessary actions. So this is very much related to frugality. Don't be wasteful with your money. Industry is don't be wasteful with your time. So money is stored value. It is what you have gotten on account of what you have spent your time on in the past. And if you're going to value the fruits of your labor that much, you should also value your labor that much. You know, playing, I don't know, Candy Crush or something when you're supposed to be at work, you don't do that. When you're at work, you work and you produce things of value. And eventually, I mean, even if your one employer doesn't realize it, you can go and find another employer, especially if you go and you keep a portfolio of the things that you've done. People will eventually recognize you for being who you are and doing what you've done, being competent and being industrious. And this one especially goes well with the whole conscientiousness thing. Frugality and industry are hallmarks of a conscientious person. And ultimately, you can just do these things or improve regularly in doing these things by asking yourself the question, is this a good use of my time? That doesn't mean don't have free time. Have enough free time to rejuvenate yourself. Be able to go on a walk. Be able to spend time with friends. Do those things. But don't let them interfere with your priorities, with your values, with the things that you are setting out to do with your life. The value you are intending to produce for others. And therefore for yourself, because you're going to be able to, of course, engage in trade and reap something that hopefully you value more than what it is that you have produced. So industry and frugality go hand in hand with each other. Virtue number 7 is sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And if you speak, speak accordingly. I'm going to say that one more time. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And if you speak, speak accordingly. Engage in open and honest communication with other people. Tell the truth. That's incredibly important. Personally, I value sincerity very highly. The idea of somebody blowing smoke up where the sun don't shine isn't something that I have much of an appreciation for. It isn't something that I have much of an appreciation for. And as such, I don't want to do that to anybody else. I hate it when people do it to me. I don't want to do it to anybody else. You can be kind, and you can be honest. You can be sincere. And for compulsive liars, that might be difficult. That might be incredibly difficult. But that's something you can work on. Now remember, all of these different things, you take a week. You work on a virtue. And remember always, you and I and everyone else on the face of the world are works in progress. We are works in progress. I don't really know what else to say because sincerity isn't something that I've really struggled with. But it's still kind of difficult for me to even go through this because I've dealt with enough insincerity and had it be very hurtful in the end that I just don't. It hurts me to even see it because I've had to deal with the consequences thereof myself. That's all I'm going to say. It's a very personal and touchy matter that I'd prefer not to go into on stream right now. Maybe some other time, but definitely not now. Not only a nice guy, be sincere. You don't need to pretend anything. You don't need to. You don't need to just be nice. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. So put the best construct on things. And if you speak, speak accordingly. That doesn't even mean being nice. You don't deceive someone hurtfully. But you can be very brutal and blunt with your words, or at least you can say brutal and blunt things. You can do it tactfully and caringly, but you don't have to go and be a wimp. Now, of course, I may have misconstrued what you meant by nice, but generally in modern society today, the idea of a nice person is a spineless person. And sincerity is quite the opposite of that. Sincerity is having the guts to speak the truth, in spite of what may happen. And if you do it Ben Franklin's way, you will still do it tactfully and caringly, and so on. I hope that explains things a little bit better. Virtue number 8, justice. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Now this implicitly assumes that we have a duty to our fellow man. This implicitly assumes that we have a duty to our fellow man. How many people take that kind of duty seriously? You wind up having people going and taking this duty, at least it seems to be a very popular thing to do in society today. You take these ideas of good and evil, and of duty, of responsibilities that we have, especially toward those that we care about, those in our own social circles, those our neighbors, our friends, our enemies. We wind up having duties, things that are associated with someone of character. How does someone with character behave toward others in society? That's a very important question to consider. It's a very meaningful question to consider, because ultimately, if you don't have any meaning, you're not going to be duty-bound to do anything. So this entire thing is wrapped up in your own significance. And only from a position of having a value system that's actually worth living or dying for, that's worth doing good for, and so on, are you able to behave justly toward anyone. Justice and what is now thrown around as justice, which is social justice, are two different things. Justice, it is first and foremost giving people what they deserve. Mercy would be giving people above and beyond that. Grace would be giving people above and beyond that. Mercy is not giving somebody something bad they deserve, and grace is giving something good that they don't deserve. And justice is giving exactly what they do deserve. In accordance with whatever our role happens to be. Don't wrong anybody. Don't injure people. If you are in business, don't omit the benefits. Don't provide bad service. If you are an employee, don't omit your work that you're doing when you're working. If you literally go and think about whatever my obligation is in my role. No. Son, daughter, father, mother, brother, sister, employee, employer, friend, enemy even, neighbor, citizen. If you're religious, your role within your church or your synagogue or your mosque or what have you. All these different things, you have a role. And that role doesn't need to be forced upon you, because the idea is you'll have the character and you'll have the morals to go and do this sort of a thing out of your own volition. Character development is a very important thing, and if we all are working on developing our character, we're not going to need Big Daddy government coming in and telling us what to do at every turn, because we are going to be taking care of our own stuff and the stuff of the people around us. We are going to be able to be just without having to necessarily worry about having an arbiter except in the absolute worst possible circumstance. We will be able to be a law unto ourselves, which is really good, because freedom requires morality. We will therefore be able to be even more free. We will be able to be more productive. We will be able to be more happy if we are virtuous. 9. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. avoid extremes is the first part, and forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Notice it says forbear. So first is about avoiding extremes. So especially if we use the analogy of an airplane, and you're flying along at 10,000 feet, and you don't have an autopilot, for instance, but you're just flying around by yourself at 10,000 feet, and you see yourself going up. You don't immediately push the yoke or the stick forward. You don't immediately just push, because then you're going to go, instead of correcting back to 10,000 feet, you're going to just do a nosedive. Or if you descend a little bit, you don't just pull yourself up and ascend very quickly. You might, mess with the trim, however you would mess with the trim. You might give a little bit of a correction and see if it is going to be necessary, and then you take the trim to alleviate the pressure that you need to put on the yoke or the stick. But you don't go and overreact. That's one way of being moderate, is you have to go and think, okay, what does a situation actually deserve? What kind of a position do I actually need to take? What kind of actions do I actually need to take in order to accomplish things? And you don't go flying off the handle at the beginning, but you go and react in a way commensurate with what needs to be done. You act in an appropriate way in terms of the extent that you act. And then when we're dealing with being wronged, because when people are injuring us, when people are hurting us, that is a time that is very difficult to be moderate. It's very easy to go and fly off the handle and go over the deep end and say or do something that we may regret later on account of somebody else doing something that might legitimately have harmed us, but might not necessarily require or deserve a harsh, over-the-top response. And so, thinking before behaving, giving ourselves some time allows us to be moderate, and just practicing dealing with things in different degrees, and taking notes and learning from our experiences helps us to learn moderation over time. As we have discussed in the past about this, we are works in progress. None of us are perfect. Yes, stall and die. Exactly. If you're at 10,000 feet, you'll probably be able to recover in time. If you can't, then you shouldn't be flying an airplane. But that's something. That's something else entirely. Unless, of course, you're in the mountains, in which case you might be screwed. Yeah. But forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. And I would say, if you're going to err on the side of mercy first. You can always escalate things later. Virtue number 10, cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. So now you're talking about Jordan Peterson's Clean Your Room. There you go. Clean your room. Clean it up. And it's interesting, in body and clothes habitation, you could also be, clean up your language. If your mom's around, don't curse. Clean up, I'll give you an example. I have this, right? And this I actually use myself. And periodically, I'll wipe my face off. And it's mostly because it helps with allergens. It helps with my allergies. It prevents my skin from being too greasy. I don't have any soap on it. It's just a wet rag, a cool wet rag. Sometimes I'll heat it up with warm water to open the pores, and then use cold water again to close the pores. But washing your face helps. Washing your face can help. This goes along also with order, keeping your place organized, but then keeping your place free of dust and dirt and grime and things of that nature. It helps you to remain healthy. It helps you to be able to breathe well. It helps you to be able to not get crap under your fingernails. It helps you to be able to do a myriad of things if you're living in a clean environment. And ultimately, if you're married and have a family, you're pretty much you need to do that. But if you're single, there's nobody wants to come over to your place if it's a dump. Nobody wants to come over to your place if it's a dump. And at least I've noticed, like when you're sick, and then also when you have mosquitoes flying around, that's absolutely horrible. But I've chosen to have mosquitoes flying around and have the window open as opposed to having the window closed and having sweat pouring out of every single pore on my body. But when you have people coming over and your place is a wreck, yeah, sure, you might have people that don't care, but it sets a particular image. And coming from somebody that doesn't really care too much about image, there are still aspects of image that do matter and always will matter. And one of them is cleanliness. It was interesting because I remember there was this piece that I read. It was a while back, and it was advice given to young men who want to go and get a girlfriend. And one of them was bathe regularly. It's like, well, yeah, especially if you're a teenager, you wind up having a whole bunch of hormonally induced scents that come from the pubic area and the underarms and so on. You don't necessarily need to go and, when you're bathing, use soap all over the place and rob your body of its oils. But, definitely the areas that stink, wash them. The rest of you, have a reasonably coarse rag that you use from time to time, or on a daily basis, whatever, and get the layer of dead skin off. Be presentable. Be well groomed, and that can vary depending on where you are and what you're doing. If you're in the military, you need to be groomed to a particular set of standards. If you're going for a particular look, you can go for that look. I personally like a little more of the messy beard, but I've noticed that it doesn't go over all that well, so I'm not having it. I love the bearded look, but it's not done what I was hoping it would do for me, and so I keep a little bit of a goatee, and that's it. Then in your clothes, do your laundry. Does that mean you have to do your laundry in the sink and iron it? Well, then do your laundry in the sink and iron it. Does it mean you have a washer and dryer? Well, then use it. Keep the whites with the whites, the blacks with the blacks, the reds with the reds. Especially keep the reds with the reds. It's the most important ones. And then you can go and kind of throw the blues in with the blacks. You might be able to throw the pinks in with the whites, but I would think it might make more sense to throw the pinks in with the reds. Do what it takes and do your laundry at the appropriate temperature. Get your clothes clean. Use detergent that doesn't have too much of a stink. When you go and get ready for a date or something, brush and floss your teeth. Wash your face, rinse your nose. That's actually another big thing you can do, is rinse your nose so that you don't wind up sounding you wind up sounding as non-nasally as possible. If you put on cologne, here's what you do. You put 1 drop onto one wrist, put the other wrist on top, rub it a little bit together, then take your wrist and you dab the dabs where the cologne was, right beneath your ears. And don't use any more. If you're going to use deodorant, I mean, if you really need it, don't use deodorant, use antiperspirant. And put antiperspirant on at night before you go to bed. You know, shower before you go to bed. Have a clean bed that you go into. Take your antiperspirant over the night so that it actually has a chance for it to go and work. So that you're not just putting it on in the morning and you're not just spraying yourself with a god-awful Axe or whatever it is that you use. And then you won't stink. You won't be off-putting in terms of how you, in terms of either body odor or the stench of that nasty body spray crap that people use. You know, that's one of the I've spoken with many women. That's one of the things that are huge turnoffs for them is the stench. So yeah, just take care of yourself, take care of your place, take care of your clothes. Let's just do it. Yes, industry also relates to clean your room. Yes, it can be interpreted as a metaphor. Indeed. Indeed. Having things in order. So number 3 also could be cleaning one's room. So moderation, cleanliness. 11, tranquility. And this is one that I have difficulty with to some extent. There are certain things that don't bother me that bother others, but then there are many things that don't bother most other people that bother me to a great extent. 11, tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. So don't cry over spilled milk. Don't have a disproportionate reaction to little things. Don't sweat the small stuff. There are all sorts of little sayings, and don't sweat the small stuff. There's actually a lovely there's a lovely book entitled "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff." I can't think of who the author was, but I highly recommend reading it for a little bit of perspective. And it talks about all the different things in life, or many different things in life, that could be construed as small stuff. And the secret is, the subtitle is, "And it's all small stuff." Don't sweat the small stuff. What do you do when you might feel like, well, this is worth sweating, or this is stressful, or what have you? If you need to extricate yourself from the situation, do so. You can even announce that you're going to extricate yourself. I will give you an immensely valuable piece of advice for when you're dealing with other people and you're going to be frustrated. Being able to take a deep breath and count to 10 before speaking is an important thing to do. But lots of people can't manage to find the time to do so. You see what I did there? I took a sip. Carry a water bottle with you. First off, it's good for your hydration. Secondly, and this from a social perspective is even more important, if you are uncorking a water bottle and drinking from it, nobody expects you to talk. You can buy yourself time by very nonchalantly or deliberately, or however you decide to present yourself, going and taking a sip or a longer drink from a bottle of water or a cup of coffee or whatever. But have a beverage ready. And while you're taking the beverage, you can use that time to think about what it is you're going to say, to think about whether or not it's worth it to respond at all, and all the rest of it. These sorts of little hacks can really prevent you from putting your foot in your mouth, causing there to be all sorts of trouble. In fact, after I learned the water bottle hack, that really saved me from a lot of awkward situations, because you go past a certain level of internal programming up here, where people just don't expect you to answer if you're in the middle of drinking something. It completely bypasses the normal expectations for immediate follow-up to some sort of inflammatory comment. And any time you can buy for yourself in those sorts of situations is precious. So be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Don't sweat the small stuff. Principle 11. Tranquility. That doesn't mean don't get bent out of shape when you need to. You can go and very carefully display anger. You can use different kinds of emotions appropriately, but don't act disproportionately to the situation. This is also very closely related to number 9, moderation. Now, number 12, this is one that many people might consider difficult. I would probably... I don't know how difficult I consider this, because it's just kind of been a part of my upbringing. It's been a part of my... I don't know. I mean, it's difficult but not unbearable. Anyhow, 12. Chastity. Rarely use venery but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. So health. So obviously, sex feels good. Sex produces children. So you can do it for these reasons. But then if you start becoming either addicted to it, you crave the stimulation, you become dull, you become weak, you injure your peace or reputation, you become obsessed with it. That goes along with moderation, order, and temperance. This is temperance with regard to your sex drive. Now, this is not being stupid with what you decide to do with regard to unzipping your fly, or lifting your skirt, or whatever it is that people wind up doing. I'm sure that there's a whole lot of other kinky things that people can figure out, but the whole point is, appreciate sex for what it is. Use it well. And in using it well, you won't abuse it. The same way that you don't want to overdrink. You don't want to drink too much alcohol. It's entirely possible that too much sex can go and dull you to the pleasures thereof. Too much sex can go and cause problems for you. You can wind up becoming an addict. So just avoid that. I'm not saying avoid sex. I love sex. I have a very high sex drive, if I'm going to be honest about these sorts of things. But there's a healthy way of having sex and an unhealthy way of having sex, and I highly recommend sticking with the healthy way. And finally, And it's interesting because when Ben Franklin was originally putting these virtues together, he didn't have this one. But someone actually went and told him, look, you are coming across as very, very arrogant. And so he put on his list virtue number 13, humility. And the explanation is, imitate Jesus and Socrates. So Ben Franklin was a very, very bright person. He would go around, he would know a lot of what was going on. He would understand things. He was well read. He was well educated. He was, for all intents and purposes, he was profoundly gifted. He knew what he was talking about. He was no dum-dum. And still, he realized that people respond an awful lot better to questioning and to gentleness and humility than they do to a hard-handed approach. People don't like to be sold. People like to go shopping with their friends and discuss their purchases. People don't like to be told anything in a condescending way. People want to be able to autonomously come to their own conclusions. And humility helps with that. Humility doesn't mean that you're somehow incapable. But humility doesn't mean that you're somehow incapable. It just means that you respect others' desire for autonomy. And the interesting thing is, because people are so reactionary in nature, you're actually more likely to gain their goodwill if you respect them for who they are and respect their autonomy for what it is. Because oftentimes, no matter how good your idea is or how good whatever it is that you're proposing, how ironclad something is, if you go and package it all up with a bow, but you don't let them go through the process of discovery, you don't let them go and come and see and find things out for themselves, they're going to be fighting you every step of the way. And for me, that's actually quite, it's a very difficult thing. It's very difficult for me because I've gone and I've done a lot of reading, and at least I think that I have a lot of things figured out. But a lot of my conclusions aren't necessarily the most palatable. They're not the most popular. They're certainly good and effective, at least I would say so. But ultimately, you and everyone else needs to come to the conclusions yourself. And it's not that I don't trust people to come to the conclusions, because I know that if I'm speaking the truth, eventually things will take place and work out. But it involves oftentimes being patient with people. It involves engaging in dialogue. And it involves constantly being willing to hear new information. And upon cogitating about that new information, admitting that I might have been wrong. I might be wrong about something. And if people realize that new information can actually change your point of view, that you are not completely unwavering and unreasonable in the face of conflicting evidence, people are much more likely to share things with you. And that humility makes you much more likely to be able to win friends and influence people. And I have, throughout the course of my own life, gone back and forth on this whole humility thing. Because I've noticed that, if you go and present yourself as an ironclad authority, you just, boom, this is the way it is, you can get initial compliance from people. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that they will find a way of biting you in the back later. I mean, the way the serotonin system works is it works. And people with low serotonin, people with low status will do what you say, but they will constantly be looking for ways to usurp you, to sabotage you, to screw you up. Better to allow them to maintain face, to come to conclusions by themselves, and if they don't come to the conclusion, well, you don't need to work with them, because there are always other people around that you can work with, and who knows, maybe people will, after many years, come around to your way of seeing things, or maybe you or I or somebody else might come around to somebody else's way of seeing things too. But humility has always been a tough one for me, because I don't know if I've ever been able to find the happy medium. I think I've always either been too self-deprecating or too humble, or just lacking it entirely. I do a very poor job in many aspects of coming across appropriately, unless you already know me, in which case it's much less likely that you're going to doubt my intentions. But this is just, my perspective on the matter, and I would really hope that the person to whom I promised this, that it would be useful, not only for you, but for all the rest of you who are watching the stream. And I'm especially going to thank you all for your patience. You're talking. See, I don't know. Nature's Gambit. Is that a book? Child Prodigies and the Development of Human Potential by David Henry Feldman with Lynn Goldsmith. Oh yeah, this. There's a really good one. It's available for free on Gutenberg.org. It's called A Children Above 180 IQ by Lita Hollingworth. That I think gives a very good picture of what it's like to be exceptionally or profoundly gifted today. Or even highly gifted plus. You wind up having an awful lot of commonalities. Sure, they might manifest themselves in different ways. But Children Above 180 IQ is a really good book. And I'm sure you can find it just by Googling it and finding the Gutenberg link, or going to Gutenberg.org and finding it there. Those are really, really awesome. So, yeah, thank you very much for your participation. And if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about for the remainder of the time, you're more than welcome to bring it all up in chat. I'm going to go and set up an intermission. And the intermission will take 8 minutes. And in that time, I invite you all to read the chat, to write in the chat, to engage in the chat, and I will, shall we say, use the facilities, get a little lemon and water for my throat, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of something to talk about when I get back. We'll go for another half an hour or so afterward, or until whatever topics are exhausted. Okay. Hope that works for you. Talk to you on the other side. Right, well, now we're back. And Mr. Garvey brought an interesting point to the conversation. It was how bad some esteemed Corns are at thinking about philosophy concepts gifted 15-year-olds can conceive. So a certain Andrew on Quora rejects solipsism on the premise that he wouldn't be able to imagine the works of Bach. It's an interesting argument that if this is the same Andrew that I'm thinking, I'm not going to go and put any last names here in the stream because I don't want to deal with slandering somebody. But ultimately, I would say if this is the same Andrew that I'm thinking of, with a W as the last initial, I would expect more. I would expect more. Because if we take solipsism to be the case, and solipsism, for those of you not acquainted with too much philosophical terminology, is the idea, is the belief, that the only thing you can be sure exists is your own mind. That's the starting point of solipsism. So, if your mind is making everything up, then how do you know that you can't come up with Bach? How do you know that you thinking about your mind is you thinking about your mind at all? How do you know? You can't. Then self-reflection is only a very small part of what can occur inside your own mind. And just because you would be reflecting on what a mind would be like in a non-solipsistic world doesn't mean that you are then therefore actually self-reflecting. In fact, given the fact that you are in a solipsistic world confined to your own mind, I don't know if there is any actual way of being able to properly self-reflect, because it involves always fabricating some sort of an outside position. But if your mind is all that exists, or rather if that's all that can be proven to exist, and therefore that's the only framework within which you're working, you can never exit the matrix. It doesn't work that way. So what am I doing here talking to myself? Oh wait, I'm not a solipsist. But that's not the argument that I would ever give against solipsism. There's a whole slew of better ones. And ultimately, I don't know if you can necessarily disprove solipsism without ultimately starting from a different framework. Solipsism is interesting in that way, but how does Andrew W. not know that he, or how does he know that he couldn't think of Bach? How does he know it isn't just his own mind? How does he not know that Bach isn't a figment of his imagination? He doesn't. So any other topics that you would be interested in talking about? Because it seems like we dealt with the inadequacy of that particular argument for the purpose of disproving solipsism. Because ultimately it winds up being ultimately you wind up just running in circles. Well, while you're busy thinking up other topics, if you are interested, I actually don't know quite what else to say, because after discussing Ben Franklin's 13 Virtues, I'm in a pretty good, mellow, relaxed frame of mind, and given that I didn't sleep particularly well last night, my brain is pretty well exhausted. Yeah, my brain is pretty well exhausted. And so I'm going to thank you all for your participation, and say that if you want to, when this gets saved as a video, Mr. Boothby, lovely. That others exist is the necessary act of faith one I make in order to stay sane. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yet it is one that that I too make in order to stay sane. Um, and a lot of what we are doing here is making meaning. Either discovering meaning, making meaning. Meaning is kind of what, I mean, there are certain contexts, right? One of your meanings, if you don't have food and shelter, is to get shelter, get food, get water. Get water, get shelter, get food. Get all the basic necessities done. But as soon as you are done with that, as soon as you can ensure that these sorts of things are met to a particular standard, then you think, well, okay, what's the point of life then? I've now gotten past the point of merely a hunter-gatherer society, or merely an agrarian society. What's the point of living? I'm not spending 18 hours a day struggling to put food in my belly anymore. Preparing for winter and the like, I'm not spending all that time. So we are in the process of actually thinking, what is significance. And historically, from many religious perspectives, from many philosophical perspectives, people have attempted to answer that question in many different ways. And if we think about things from a genetic perspective, our genes want nothing more than to propagate themselves. And the ones that win are the ones that propagate. So it's possible to think about this sort of a thing in terms of utility, not necessarily for us, but specifically for our genetic material, and that certain things could be more advantageous to survival of our genetic material than other things. And having a meaningful life could mean, establishment of a better pool of resources for our progeny to pull from, establishment of better traditions, establishment of better ideas, pushing society forward in such a way as to make propagating our genetic material more probable. So that's one way of going and looking at the meaning thing. I think it's a pretty compelling way, and manages to explain quite a bit. Okay, so Mr. Garvey takes the view that solipsism is a superset. And Toka says, I think a lot of our acts are still largely or maybe solely influenced by our instinctual desires. Where else do thoughts arise? Well, that's a very interesting question. I think it's one that can only be addressed once we discuss the nature of reality. Okay, is reality our perception of reality? Is reality something transcendent of our own perceptions? Because ultimately, our perceptions, insofar as we know, we have our eyes, we have our ears, nose, mouth. We have touch sensors, pain sensors, all the rest of it. And we have sight, we have taste, we have smell, we have hearing, and we have touch. So those are all media through which we experience the world. But how accurate is that? How much of that is due to our how much of what we experience is due to where our attention is? Because I know people that don't even realize that they're experiencing a painful stimulus because their attention is directed somewhere else. But does that mean that, the nail that I just stepped on isn't real? So we have to go and have a nature of, okay, what is real and when and how and so on, before we can even begin to think about where thoughts arise. Well, thinking transcendentally is awesome. Thinking transcendentally is great. But many people don't believe in the transcendental. They believe only in the material. And I will be straightforward with you and say I am not a materialist. So that will give you a bit of a background regarding what I believe. Mr. Boothby says, civilization and its culture is sometimes a comfort when I face loneliness and my eventual conjectural death. Yeah. And part of that has to do with the fact that our biology is wired for us to exist in some capacity or another with other people. That's why serotonin exists. Dopamine exists more for our selfish natures, and I can go and look for new things, learn new things, gather new things, try new things, explore, and so on. Serotonin is for status, and oxytocin is for bonding and the like. So we have all of these inbuilt biochemical / hormonal / neurological underpinnings for our behavior. So it would only make sense for us to be able to fall back to what has always been natural behavior for human beings. And especially if we find intellectual peers, and then peers with regard to what we value, peers with regard to our value system, working with them and living with them, or living, in proximity to them to the point where you get to see them on a semi-regular or regular basis. Those things are very good for our sanity. Those things are very healthy for us. There are certain things that are integral to the human condition, simply due to our basic biology. Exactly. We are blind to a lot more than we can see. The gorilla thing. For any of you viewers that haven't heard of this dancing gorilla thing, there was this basic idea that one is to watch a video. And there are many people bouncing a ball back and forth. There's a bunch of people with white shirts and a bunch of people with black shirts. or a bunch of people dressed in white, a bunch of people dressed in black. And then the people with the white shirts, you're supposed to count. The task of this video is you're supposed to count how many times people with white shirts bounce the ball amongst themselves. So basically, you are excluding people with black shirts from your attention. You're directing your attention to people with white shirts and counting the bounces. Then, in the middle of the video, walks this gorilla onto the screen, does hoo 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 hoo, and then walks away. And it's found that the majority of people do not spot the gorilla if they're in the process of counting bounces in between people dressed in white, because things that are black and moving are deliberately filtered out of conscious awareness. Hello, Mr. Man. We've been streaming for nearly 2 hours. I am so sorry that we're about ready to close up, but in the meantime, is there something that you'd be interested in talking about before we close down the stream? Oh, by the way, this will be eventually saved and buffered under a video with the same title, Ben Franklin's 13 Virtues, etc., CSC episode 51. So you're more than welcome to go and look at the earlier part. It had to do with one person from Core asking me a bit about recommendations and me responding with the fact that I would talk about conscientiousness and other things like that on stream today. Then we got to talking about solipsism and civilization. It was a pretty cool conversation, I thought. What about other primates? The dancing gorilla test is the test about attention. It didn't have anything to do per se with other primates. That chimpanzees are the smartest species after human beings. Yes. Indeed. Yes, they are. And it's really interesting how such very subtle differences in things such as metabolism, utilization of biochemical resources, and the nature of one's cerebral cortex can produce such drastic differences between humans and animals. And notice I'm actually making the distinction between humans and animals in the same way that Aristotle does, in saying that reason is something that makes us special. And I just think that it's really cool, and I don't know if we can yet, at least, have quite an adequate explanation for exactly why that is. But it is definitely something fun and cool to ponder. Dolphins. Dolphins, pigs, carp. Mr. Boothby, I wish that there was a way to, like, give points to comments. That comment. Well, have been shown to. That's an interesting way of putting it, I think. Okay, so dolphins, pigs. That's that's a tricky one, because what do we know about cognitive capacity? So how capable is the larynx of a pig? How capable is the tongue of a pig for conveying different ideas via speech or via noise? And ultimately, how much is our mode of interacting with the world limiting us in terms of the sorts of judgments we can make? Does it limit us? Does being able to see things suffice in terms of getting an understanding? And we don't know those things because we haven't been able to look especially enough into a neonatal biology, neonatal stuff. So I'd say that this is one of those situations that if we want to gain a better understanding of how things work, we would really need to take a look at the science before we can go and say anything too definitively about that. Yeah, the reason and logic are definitely beyond the things that they do. I'm not going to dispute that, because they can go and understand and at least anticipate things that are generally outside their control. But then ultimately the way that they react to these different things would indicate some difference in the capacity to reason. But exactly what the nature of it is, and exactly what would happen, let's say if you took a neonatal pig and started, connecting its neurons to something with opposable fingers, some sort of a mechanical device. Would that pig then start using that mechanical device to do something? I don't know. So there are all sorts of different experiments that we could conduct, and all sorts of different hypotheses we could make and test before being able to say anything about this with 100% certainty. And so that would be, I think that'd be a cool thing to discuss. Moments when lions have killed other cats and non-felines for sport rather than survival. Yes. And house cats play like that in that particular regard, killing mice without eating them and so on. And that sort of behavior has actually been demonstrated to be more infantile. So young cats learn to hunt by playing these games, and then as they grow up, they cease playing games and start hunting only for the purpose of getting their food in the interest of minimizing energy usage. So house cats don't ever outgrow that. House cats are, therefore, by definition, less mature than, say, lions that sit around relaxing for the majority of the day, only to get up once or twice to go and, eat and poop and so on. But the reason the lion would do it for sport rather than for survival is actually a consequence of immaturity, as opposed to something else. at least based upon the best of our knowledge today. Now, we might go and find out that that knowledge is wrong at some other point. But, so, you know, all that stuff is still quite up in the air and worth examining further. If you want to go and look at behavioral biology of lions, that would actually be a fun field of research to get into. And Mr. Boothby says, apparently we humans have neurons unique to us, though whether this is one of the sources of our superior cognition is up for more research. Yeah. Perhaps, Toka, that is. Are humans infantile because they still play as adults? I would say maybe not as mature as we all can be. Or rather, we have learned to play games rather than kill each other as ways of jockeying for status or connecting with each other. You know, it's one different thing if for social status rather than, you know, pistols at 10 paces at high noon, to sit down in front of a chessboard and ultimately have the same biochemical reaction that we would get by winning a fight that we would get by checkmating the opponent's king in a well-fought, in a well-played chess match. And then, of course, having the commensurate serotonin levels working themselves out accordingly in order to establish a pecking order. That could also be something to consider, that as long as we wind up having social hierarchies, we will always have games that people use for climbing and falling in the hierarchies, because it's not actually worth it for us to kill each other for status, because cooperation often winds up being more useful than pure competition, and so you wind up having a mix of them. And I would at least say that there's a good case to be made for the idea that that's one of the uses of games. That, and also just basic socialization without too much worry about status. But it's interesting, you'll find that it's either people that want to gain the favor of losers, or losers themselves that suggest games that don't have a clear winner. So that's something to think about, that even in that sense, there's always some sort of vying for position at play. You know, there are lots of passive-aggressive games where you gain position by pretending to not be gaining position and doing things behind the scenes to gain status anyway. And the rules of the game change depending on where you're at. Now, I happen to hate passive-aggressive games. I think they're stupid, I think that they're useless, and ultimately I think that they're ways for weak losers to gain status. That's my opinion. Here we go. You have to take into account that even in the non-human kingdom there are exceptions to the rule, yes. Within the mammal family, to some extent the bird and reptile family, you can always cripple rather than kill. Yes, amphibians, invertebrates, and fish are more hard to pinpoint, and that ultimately has to do with the extent of the development of the brain. That ultimately has to do with the extent of the development of the brain. So you just have to think of what would the utility be of maiming or crippling rather than killing. Do you want to maim or cripple anybody? That's another thing. Do you want to? And interestingly, given how social human beings are, a lot of the time the answer is no. In fact, it only winds up being mostly when people are competing for resources that are so absolutely scarce that there's no way of doing anything other than competing, that people actually go and are violent at all. Very few people are violent for violence own sake, and those people have generally, at least throughout the course of most history, been culled from the gene pool at the, or rather, with the result that, you know, people who are capable of more subtlety in amassing what they want, or people who are capable of actually being creative and producing something of value out of something that was once deemed not as valuable or not valuable at all, wind up rising to the top. There are many, many games that are played around that particular topic. Yeah, it's another alternative to fully eliminating the competition. Or that's interesting when you say a secluded area like a bubble or dome. Exile used to be a common punishment. I mean, common. I mean, you don't know how common it was. Like getting thrown in the stocks and getting rotten fruit thrown at you, I suppose, was more common than exile. But it used to be something that people would do for very severe crimes. Yeah, bugs and rocks provoke imagined empathy in me. Indeed. And it's been established that if you go and, well, look at a Mini Cooper car. Look at a Mini Cooper car. It's designed to look like a happy face. Look at a Lambo. It's designed to have an edge. Look at a Lotus. I mean, each car has a characteristic personality as defined by the position of headlights, the position of the license plate. You know, people don't buy cars with 3 lights for a reason, because people don't have 3 eyes. And then what's the difference in between, let's say, if you're giving people a score, if you're giving people a score on an exam, and let's say that someone scores a 100%. You have the 100%. Now what happens when you wind up having somebody going and changing the 100 to looking like that? Or if you go and you buy a set of like the googly eyes that you can get in an arts and crafts store. You buy the googly eyes from the arts and crafts store and you stick them on a rock or on some sort of inanimate object. People start going and attributing more and more human-like characteristics. I mean, people already anthropomorphize animals, assuming that there are some sort of human emotions when instinct is enough to explain behaviors. I mean, but we tend to, because we have the particular psyche that we have, we make all these different kinds of attributions. We are sympathetic, we are empathetic on account of that, even if the sympathy and empathy don't necessarily hold from the standpoint of dealing with other species. Your girlfriend looks like a Jeep. Well, the question is, did you get the girlfriend because you like a Jeep? Or did you, or are you going to get a Jeep because you like your girlfriend? Or how does that all work? Yeah, all the different proportions of cars are selected by designers for mostly the reason that there are a certain aesthetics in nature that we have gone over time to find pleasing, and people just go and copy it. I mean, people want to buy a Ferrari for a reason. if you go and you look, there was a particular documentary on the making of, I believe it was McLaren cars. It was making of the McLaren F1 or the McLaren F1 LM, the street legal version of the McLaren supercar. And, or maybe it was a newer version, I'm not sure. But anyhow, there was a McLaren documentary, and the guy who designs the exterior, before and even during the process of wind tunnel testing and all the rest of it, the guy has his office full of all sorts of different things from nature that he considers beautiful. And then he goes and sits there with his sketch pad, and he copies the stuff that he finds beautiful in nature and goes and takes this little bit from here and that little bit from there and then throws it all together. We stick with what we know, and in terms of design, we stick with what we like because we know it sells. And ultimately, there are certain things that will sell now and in the past and in the future. Like the candy red bicycle with the special curves. Those will never completely go out of style because the curves are just perfect. The pictures of pinup girls in corsets. Those accentuate natural body curves, and that means that men are going to have an appreciation for them from now until the end of time. It's just life. Oh yeah. I don't know, Mr. Man, if you said that the creations from Japan and Germany are particularly are in particular highly advanced and extremely unique. But yes, I would tend to agree with that, especially German stuff. Especially German stuff. Yeah, imitate us. That's interesting that you'd say. Imitate us. It's a little, I mean, we make them, but we make them as imitations of ourselves. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, we have been going for 2 hours, 18 minutes, and 16, 17, something like that, seconds. Sorry, and 30 seconds, or whatever it may be now. And so, with that said, I'm going to suggest that we be done with this stream. I know that 16 minutes of it was 8 minutes waiting for the stream to start and 8 minutes of intermission, but unless you guys come up with more content, and unless I can go and figure out a way of making my voice stay strong. Uncanny Valley, white dolls are spooky. Yes, very much so. Dolls are very spooky, or can be spooky, the more they represent reality. If you know it's fake, you know it's fake, but then the more real it becomes, and you still spot tiny discrepancies, then you get creeped out. And that ultimately has to do with our fear of human beings that are ever so slightly different. Or many people's fear of human beings that are ever so slightly different. Lack of wanting to procreate with something that looks slightly abnormal, in that we might be concerned that, we might wind up, imparting some sort of disease. All of these different things are hardwired into us. And we would do well to pay attention to these sorts of things and to understand where they're coming from and to act accordingly. Burn it! Large eyes, small mouth, no nose, massive head. Burn it! Yeah, like the the traditional alien. Look, yeah, things that go in and take certain aspects. Like, you associate big eyes and big foreheads with more intelligence. So if you see big eyes, big forehead, small chin, then you go and think, well, this could be dangerous. This could be something that could be a threat to us because it could be smarter than us. It could know things that we don't, do things that we don't. And so it triggers a threat response. It can cause hair to stand on end. It can do all the different things that any predator could. Because ultimately, we human beings know and are cognizant of the fact that our single biggest weapon is up here. Brains are worth way more than brawn, because brains let you make tools. Brains let you make guns. If you have a big enough gun, nobody can even come to use their brawn on you. Right? Traps. If you have a minefield around your property, nobody can get to you. If you have razor wire fences, if you have all these different things that are inventions, you don't have to be strong. An old lady can defend herself with inventions against somebody that only has brute force. This is much more powerful. And ultimately, because this is the powerful thing, this is what causes all sorts of inventions to be scary. This is why atomic weapons are scary. This is why guns can be scary. Because what they do is they allow us to have considerably more leverage than we would were the only things at our disposal to be our hands. Even sticks and stones are an improvement upon that. Dolph Lundgren, yes. Brains and bronze, and watch out and beware. Yes, indeed. Indeed. Though I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I don't think I am. Obviously, I wouldn't say something if I didn't think I was wrong, but in the end, if you're not naive, I would say that brains beats brawn. Assuming the environment is conducive for making tools. So if you have a very brainy, very brawny guy versus somebody even more brainy, like a couple of standard deviations in intelligence higher, the more brainy person will win given enough time to construct tools. The more brainy person will win given the time to construct tools, but not given the time to construct tools. If you're just thrown into the ring, then I would pick the person with brains and brawn. Heck, I would pick the person with brawn over the person with brains if the person with brains had never gone and learned relevant portions of anatomy if they were in a fighting ring. Yeah, opposable thumbs. Yeah, it does largely depend, but I'm assuming that there's nothing. It's just completely, just nothing, a cage, and that's it. Then my money would be on the person with brawn. Then my money would definitely be on the person with brawn. Yeah, in a no holds beatdown with bare hands in a cage, and you took a gorilla and a human being, even the strongest man alive wouldn't win. The strongest man alive couldn't win. I mean, you could go for the vitals, and the gorilla would just laugh and then rip your arms off. life isn't a cage. We live in the world we live in, and have lived in the world that we have lived in, and so we are adapted for the world that we do live in. And that is something for which I am very thankful. And on that note, I would like to thank you all for your participation, for your attention. Invite those of you that showed up a little bit later to Earth is a cage, and still people have figured out how to escape. So yeah, I'm going to thank you all for your participation, and tell you I look forward to seeing you if you happen to decide to show up at 9 o'clock p.m. or 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. Talk to you guys later.